Hello and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. A very warm good morning to everyone. I hope all of you are doing good. I welcome you back to today's session of the Hindu Newspaper Analysis, a place where every single day at 10 a.m. we analyze the day's Hindu newspaper by looking into all the important news stories both from the mains and the prelims examination point of view. Also reminding you, we are running a crash course specifically for those who are appearing for this year's prelims exam on the 16th of June. This crash course involves a class on YouTube every single day at 7 p.m. where we discuss questions that are relevant for the prelims examinations, and through those questions we try and revise that. Today is 22nd of May. Today will be the first class of ancient history, followed by Indian economy, international relations, medieval history, and all these other subjects will be covered. In case you missed out on any of the earlier classes, please feel free to watch those from here as well. Now let's see what are the topics that we have taken up for today's discussion. From the mains examination point of view, the first topic is about how climate change has never been a part of India's politics. The author here is using the fact that we have such huge elections across all these phases. A lot of things are talked about by the politicians, but one thing that the politicians never talk about, and one thing that even the voters don't ask them, is about climate change and how the government is trying to control that. So first article is about that. Second article is about a very serious condition called pre-eclampsia. This is a condition found in pregnant ladies which is very harmful to them. The reason why this article has been written is because today we observe the pre-eclampsia prevention day, and that is why this article is relevant. What can we do to prevent it? What are the initiatives that have been taken? Third article is about Russia's nuclear posturing. As you know, ever since Russia-Ukraine war has started, the Russian government on multiple occasions has threatened the world about use of nuclear weapons. The author here talks about the implications of such a threat and what can happen around the world. Fourth article is again from environment. It is about how our environmental footprint at an individual level increases as we become more financially strong. The article deciphers how when you move from a financially weaker background to more stable life, you tend to have change in activities that lead to an increased carbon footprint. So there's an article about that. Then there's an article about RBI proposing certain changes in project financing. Very interesting article. The RBI wants to stop or at least reduce the number of NPAs given for project financing. The big infrastructure projects specifically are actually at a risk of going bad. So there have been some changes in the guidelines. And in the end, from prelims point of view, there's an article from Science about the role of X chromosomes, how X chromosomes are being seen as a reason for diseases in older women, specifically autoimmune diseases. So let's begin without any further ado with the first topic. Now, as you know, the elections are going on. They in fact will be completed in just a few weeks. The author here is talking about the fact that when you see the elections in India, you see a lot of people talking about different things. Freebies, religious divide, people offering that I will do a census, I will do economic distribution, so on and so forth. A lot of these things are said. One important thing, however, which is just not said by any political party or not even demanded by the voters, is climate change. If you see the, let's say, election manifesto of the two main political parties in India, Congress and the BJP, in the election manifesto you will see one or two lines about environment, climate change. But when you see these big speeches when thousands of people are being addressed by the politicians, none of them even mention the single word about climate change. That is a very dangerous precedent. Now, why is it that the politicians behave in this manner? It's simple. When you say we want to curtail climate change, what we mean to say is we want to put a stop or at least put a break on certain industrial activities. Now, that will not be taken well by the people. Climate change is not a very easy discussion. You need to actually argue with the people to find a balance between industrial development and preserving your environment. Maybe our politicians think that the people are not ready for this. Maybe the politicians think that people are just ready for freebies, I'll do this for you, I'll bring this for you, rather than thinking about the future generations. This is a big problem. Now, it doesn't mean that the middle class in India is not understanding of the fact that climate change is a reality. Look at what is happening in Ladakh. Sonam Wangchuk in Ladakh, the very famous leader in Ladakh, has been running this agitation, drawing attention to the ecological degradation of Ladakh, and thousands of people, not just from Ladakh, but across the country, thousands of people, lakhs of people have supported him. You do see talks about climate change. It's not that people are unaware of this, but just that when it comes to voting, we do not see any big political party or any big established leader talking in these terms so that the people can be convinced that something will change when they come to power. Now, there are reasons why parties don't speak about this issue. First being, as I said, it's a difficult conversation to have. You can't just say, okay, from tomorrow onwards, you'll stop climate change. Stopping climate change or reducing climate change would mean that you have to put a break or reduce your industrial activity. On one hand, you are saying we will set up manufacturing, we will give more jobs to people in manufacturing. On the other hand, would you say that I will stop manufacturing or I will not give as many jobs? That is a very big conundrum for the government. That's why politicians usually try and avoid that difficult conversation. That's the first reason. Second, there are industrial constituencies that still rely very heavily on fossil fuels. Do you know, despite so much advancement in solar, wind, etc., and the fact is India is advancing at a very good speed in solar energy generation. Even after all of that, even today, over half of India's electricity is made through coal. So thermal power plants still constitute more than half of India's electricity generation even today. So we are still highly dependent on fossil fuel, and the industries that are dependent on them, they also, I won't say that they basically support the government, but they are also one of the donors or funders of the political parties. They don't want political parties to speak up against them. Indian politics usually, and not just Indian politics, rather all politics, usually prefer short-term goals over long-term goals. I'll give you a simple example. You go to the website of IRCTC when you try and book a train ticket. You will realize something. If you travel often by train, you will see that in the past 10 to 12 years or even more, train ticket prices have hardly changed. It's not that things have not become costlier. If you go, for example, to the website of IRCTC, it will tell you that IRCTC only charges about 57% of the cost of the ticket. So if the IRCTC, let's say, is spending 100 rupees to transport you, it will only charge 57 rupees from you. Why? Because the government knows if it increases the ticket prices, people will be angry, people will not vote for them. Rather than thinking from the long-term perspective that it will improve the health of the railways, we think from a short-term perspective. For the government, it's difficult to make policies that will give you result after 15 years. Because voters want result in 1 or 2 years. Before the next election is here, you want results of the government policies. And that becomes a problem. That discourages the politicians from talking about these things in the long term. Yes, the voters have become educated, knowledgeable, but there's something very interesting that you will see. The educated and knowledgeable voters that you talk about, a very interesting phenomena that you will see in these elections is, in urban areas, voting percentage is lower usually as compared to rural areas. So the assumption that in the urban areas are educated voters who know the importance of voting, in those areas you will see a much lesser voter turnout. So this is again a problem that the government faces, that yes, the middle class might demand certain things, but they don't come out to vote. The government will only listen to those who come out to vote in large numbers, and this is where things need to change. Where do we stand right now? What is the present situation? The article says, as per the National Action Plan on Climate Change, a lot of efforts have been taken by the government. However, at the international level, a lot of different policies, a lot of different reports have come out, indicating that maybe India's efforts are not enough. For example, there is a famous climate action tracker. This is developed by Climate Analytics, that's a Global Climate Science and Policy Institute. So it's kind of an NGO situated in Berlin. They give rankings to different countries, and they give basically a overall view of the efforts being taken by the countries to fight against climate change. They term India's efforts as highly insufficient based on India's 2030 projections. So, and I'll show you some of the other details of this report. So India's action as per this report is highly insufficient. We need to do much more. At local level, some things are being done. Take an example of Mumbai. There is a Mumbai Climate Action Plan for Mumbai municipality specifically. But again, making plans on paper is one thing, but implementing that and seeing the outcome is something entirely different. The Supreme Court, as you know, just a couple of months back, said that people of India have the right to be free and adverse effects of climate change are a violation of Article 21. So even Supreme Court has come out in favor of having a clean environment free of pollution. But again, these are things that take a lot of time and discussion. Just because Supreme Court has said something or an article has been written doesn't mean that things will change automatically. Now, I wanted to show you some more details about that climate action tracker. This is a screenshot from that report that I have taken. This is India specific, where India's overall rating is highly insufficient. It talks about how India's NDC or National Determined Contribution targets, even if they are fulfilled, they will just be below 4 degrees Celsius mark, while the world is trying to reduce the Earth's temperature, curtail the Earth's temperature to only up to 2 degrees Celsius mark. Not just this, if you look at other aspects of it, let's say domestic target gap, international support, in all these aspects, India is lagging. In all these targets, we see that India has been highly insufficient, again, as per this report. Whenever, if you want to quote such a statement in the examination, please do quote that as per this report or as per this index, India's 2030 goals are highly insufficient. Please don't just write that India's goals are highly insufficient without giving the context of it. So do give the context about what are we talking about, who is this or what report is this, and then quote whatever you want to in the long run. Now, it's not that nothing positive has happened. There are some positive developments I wanted to share with you. One of the problems that we have in these kind of editorials is that if they are in a negative sense, they will keep on giving negative examples and not just show the positive side as well. So let me show some of the positive sides. For example, our renewable purchase obligation from power distribution companies has increased. Means Government of India has basically said to power distribution companies that you have to purchase more renewable energy or electricity being produced from renewable resources. Policy support has also increased considerably. We have seen the Government of India focusing, for example, on green hydrogen. The Government of India has also been focusing on biogas. There is Biogas Alliance that has been formed. The government has also started production linked incentive program for electrolyzers, especially for green hydrogen production. As you know, production of green hydrogen is dependent on the availability of electrolyzer that is used to break water so that you can separate hydrogen and oxygen, and that is also something the government has been focusing a lot on. Move on to the second article for the day. The second article for the day is about a problem that the pregnant women face. Mainly it's called pre-eclampsia. Now, the reason why we are discussing this article is that today, 22nd of May, is a World PE Day, meaning that it is a World Pre-eclampsia Prevention Day. This is an issue that pregnant women have mostly when they are over 20 weeks of their pregnancy. So usually what happens? After over 20 weeks of their pregnancy, they might see symptoms such as swelling in their feet, swelling in their legs, hands, due to increased blood pressure. What it leads to is that it might impact the organs of the mother and might prove to be fatal as well. There are a lot of instances where it has led to multi-organ failure in mothers as well. And that is why it's important to understand that these kind of issues have to be addressed. Maternity anyways is a very, very complex time period. These 9 months or whatever time period that the mother goes through, it's a very, very complex period, and it involves a lot of people working together to ensure a safe delivery. There are not just doctors, there are the medicine specialists, frontline workers. In rural areas, you have the ASHA health workers. All of them play an extremely, extremely important role. And the point is, in a pregnancy, a lot of things can go wrong. Even when you take all the precautions, even then there are chances that some things might go wrong. And this is why, if something is at least preventable, there have to be steps taken in that regard. Now, pre-eclampsia also is not something that is not preventable. There are a lot of tests that you can conduct, but the problem is Now, see, when you are, let's say, a pregnant lady, you go to a doctor for a checkup. If you go to a government hospital, let's say in India, for all these tests, they will ask you to come after a few days because there's such a long waiting period. You might get to have these tests for free in a government installation, but there is such a long waiting period that a lot might go wrong. When you go to a private facility, they will allow you these on the spot tests, but they're extremely expensive. These are not tests that you would be able to afford on a very regular basis. So if these tests, for example, cost 8,000, 10,000 rupees, and if you need to have that every month or every 2-3 weeks, it's not affordable for everyone. And that becomes a problem. That is why India has one of the largest maternal mortality rates in the world even today. This pre-eclampsia is again a problem that can be prevented but has to be looked into by at least making the test cheaper or allowing on having more infrastructure in the government facilities. This can lead to issues such as heart failure, heart disease, stroke, etc. because it can be extremely dangerous. As I told you, it is mainly due to persistent high blood pressure during pregnancy or even in the postpartum period. It can lead to fluid in the lungs, decreased blood platelets, and a lot of other complications can come into this. Now, if you look at India's own data from National Family Health Survey number 5, it says that perinatal mortality rate is about 32 per 1,000 pregnancy, while neonatal mortality is 25 for 1,000 live births. This problem of preeclampsia does play a major role in maternal mortality rate. As I said, it usually commences after 20 weeks of gestation period. There are multiple symptoms, but the most standout symptom that can be very easily recognized is swelling in face, swelling in hands, feet, and different parts of the body. This usually is categorized as high-risk pregnancy, and it requires proper infrastructure at the government or at the private sector to handle this. The author of this article is saying that there is a program being run right now by some doctors in India. There is a program being run by Indian Radiological and Imaging Association. That program is called Samrakshan. Those who don't understand Hindi, Samrakshan basically means kind of protection. So a program called Samrakshan is being run. The idea is to ensure safe motherhood across all districts in India. They are specifically focusing on the case of preeclampsia. The aim is to reduce preeclampsia from 8 to 10% to 3% at least, and fetal restriction should also be reduced to 10%. Now again, none of these programs tell that the aim is to bring it to zero, because it's just not possible to bring it down to zero with such a huge scale of population, but the aim is to reduce it drastically. As you can see here, there are multiple tests that can detect preeclampsia, but again, these are not very cheap tests. These are not tests that cost a few hundred rupees. They go into thousands. At the government facilities, you might get it free, but it's a long waiting period. I personally know, not a laughing matter, but I personally know someone who went to AIMS. I think it was a cataract surgery, if I remember correctly, and they were told that yes, we will have a surgery for cataract. And the person went, let's say in 2018, the person was told or given a date of 2020, that come back after 2 years, because there's a waiting period of 2 years. So either you wait for 2 years or you go to a private hospital and spend that money. I'm not saying these diagnostic tests are waiting of 2 years, but yes, there is a significantly long gap between the time that you go and between the time that you are given that appointment. Now, I also wanted to show you some international data about maternal mortality. Recently, the UN released a report. The report was called Trends in Maternal Mortality Rate. It talks about India and it talks about other parts of the world as well. As you expect, Africa unfortunately has the highest number of maternal mortality. The report says that every 2 minutes a woman dies during pregnancy or during childbirth. In 2020, there were about 287,000 maternal deaths. This is also denting UN's Sustainable Development Goals. About 70% of maternal deaths in 2020 were in the sub-Saharan African region. When you say sub-Sahara, it means basically countries that lie south of the Sahara. Most of it were ruled by the French. One of the poorest areas in the entire world, that's the sub-Saharan region. What about India? In 2020, India recorded the second highest number of maternal mortality deaths after Nigeria. Although we have been reducing it continuously, but still India's maternal mortality rate is still very high. In 2020, it was 103, much improved as compared to past few decades, but there's still a lot of scope to improve it even further. Next article is from International Relations about Russia threatening to use nuclear weapons time and time again. A war that they started, a war that no one enforced upon them, a war that has been going on for over 2 years now. In that war, Russia is the only one, or Russia is the one that is again threatening the world that we will use nuclear weapon. Now that's a very strange situation. Usually a country says I'll use nuclear weapons when they're attacked by someone. But Russia in this situation is the aggressor but behaving like someone who has been attacked over. Now it is not the first time that Russia or any other country has threatened that they will use nuclear weapons, but you never know when that situation may come. Russia, as you know, has said that it will be placing its nuclear weapons in Belarus. Belarus is a neighboring country of Russia, ruled by Lukashenko, very close friend of Putin. In fact, many times Belarus is being called as the vassal state of Russia. Whatever Russia says, Belarus usually does. Now, around the world, no one is naive enough not to understand the consequences of a nuclear war. A nuclear war is assured mutual destruction. But even then, it is a threat that countries use. You look at Pakistan. Just in our neighborhood, Pakistan ministers keep on saying statements such as we don't have nuclear weapons just for showpiece. We will use it if required. The world does not know what will happen when a nuclear war actually takes place, but everyone knows for sure it will be assured destruction. Now, there are multiple treaties signed in this regard. The UN has made certain efforts, the world together has come up and made certain efforts. However, Russia has backed out of many of them in the past few years, and that becomes dangerous. The problem here also is, if a P5 country like Russia, if such a strong country like Russia behaves in such a way, what stops the other countries from going to the same path? Countries such as Iran, countries such as North Korea, they will be emboldened that yes, we can also do the same, because if no action is being taken against Russia, why would someone come to us? As you know, when USSR disintegrated, some of their nuclear weapons were in Ukraine also. But Ukraine in the Budapest Memorandum surrendered these to Russia. Russia had promised them safety and security in return. But that seems to be backfiring for Ukraine right now. Recently, even Iran had made a statement that if there are threats from Israel, they will be forced to develop a nuclear weapon. But again, Iran never says officially that they have a nuclear weapon. Countries believe, Israel more specifically believes that Iran already has a nuclear weapon. But Iran said that if Israel behaves in a way that it does, it may be forced to develop a nuclear weapon soon. So the problem is that these threats are now becoming increasingly common from different parts of the world. That's a dangerous place to be in. Now, many countries that have accepted that they have a nuclear weapon have their own nuclear doctrine. India also, as you know, has its own nuclear doctrine. One of the main components of India's nuclear doctrine is no first use policy. Simply speaking, that India will not be the first one to use a nuclear weapon. We will use a weapon if we are attacked by a nuclear weapon. These are some of the key ingredients of our nuclear doctrine. No first use policy. We will not be the first one to use it. Credible minimum deterrence. That is, we would maintain sufficient number of weapons to deter a nuclear attack. It is not about matching other countries. It's not that if Pakistan has 100 weapons, we'll also have 100. We'll have a minimum number that is required, that will be sufficient in case we need to use it immediately. That is why a lot of international reports, when they publish how many nuclear weapons the countries have, you usually will see Pakistan having more nuclear weapons than India. Don't be surprised, it's because of India's policy. It's not that we don't have the ability to do that, but India does not maintain as high of a stockpile because it's not easy to preserve these. The more you have of these, the more difficult it is to preserve, so it's not very easy to even keep them intact. India has also agreed that they will not threaten to use nuclear weapons against a country that does not have nuclear weapons itself. So a country who does not have it will not be used or will not have to face nuclear weapons from India. And if India is attacked with a nuclear weapon, or even if we are attacked with a biological weapon or a biochemical weapon, in that case also India will retaliate with a nuclear attack. But again, the world knows that nuclear attack or a nuclear war will mean assured mutual destruction. Basically, both the sides will be destroying each other, and that is a situation which the countries don't want to go into. The next article is about environmental footprint. In simple terms, the theme of this article is that as we gradually have more purchasing power, as people transition from being poor or financially weaker to middle class and then become rich, their environmental footprint increases, which is obvious. See, when you don't have enough money, obviously you will not buy a lot of stuff that you require. As you have more money, you'll start buying more stuff, you'll start driving around more, you'll start using a personal vehicle as compared to your normal public transportation or walking. So this is not something which is surprising. This is a research done on exact percentage on how much percentage of carbon footprint increases when a person transitions from lower income group to a middle and a higher income group. The study that is being quoted in this article basically researched about three things: the use of water, air pollution and carbon footprint. These three things specifically, how do they change as people transition from lower income to higher income? For example, water footprint, that is the use of water, increases by about 39%, but CO2 emissions increase by about 55%, which is obvious. Again, this is not something that is surprising. You can imagine if you don't have money, you will not buy a lot of clothes, right? If you have money, you will start buying more clothes, more shoes, start traveling around more. You might start buying things that you don't want. All that is calculated. So if you buy a pair of jeans, the pair of jeans was made in a factory that would have emitted certain carbon. All that is added to your name. You bought that jeans, so you are responsible for that. So that's how it is calculated. Again, this is not a surprise. The key contributors of how the carbon footprint increases, the report says, number one, eating out, going to a restaurant is a significant factor in increasing environmental footprint. Consumption of more fruits and nuts, luxury consumption such as jewelry, etc., all of that increases carbon consumption. Now, while all of that is true, there is something interesting I would like to tell you here. The report says if you look at the top 10% rich people of India, so top 10% richest people in India, they on an average emit about 6.7 tons of CO2 per year. I'm only talking about the top 10% of Indians, top 10% richest Indians, they emit about 6.7 tons of CO2 per year. This is more than the global average of 4.7 tons. Please don't be worried. If you take the top 10% richest of any country in the world, it will be higher than world average. That is why they are rich and they are not average. So it should not really come as a surprise. Top 10 richest. See, the richer you are, the more you will spend, the more you will travel, you'll have your own private jets. I'm not saying it is right, but I'm saying it's not a surprise that the richest people would obviously spend or emit more carbon dioxide as compared to the world average. However, if you look at on an average, how much energy does an Indian consume, you will be surprised to see how little energy consumption do Indians have per capita. If you look at energy consumption per capita for an Indian, it's one of the lowest in the world. And I'll just show you a table for you to understand. This is a graph that shows you energy consumption per capita worldwide. It's a 2022 number. These data usually come in after a year or two. So it shows in kilowatt hour per person how much energy, how much electricity does a person consume. Look at this. Iceland 53,924. Obviously such a cold country, so people use energy to warm up their houses, etc. Norway 28,000, Kuwait 19,000, Qatar, etc. And you will not even see India in this list. This table, at least this screen, ends at Australia 9,600. Now where does India stand? Let me show you where does India stand. India stands here. 1297. 1297 kilowatt hour. That is the average electricity consumption of an Indian in 2022. It would not have changed much even when you are in 2024. So when you ask India that you should reduce your energy consumption because you are polluting the world, this is what India tells the world, that look at the per capita scene. Even if you look at China, China's electricity consumption almost 5 times that of India. Look at Germany, look at France, UK, Turkey, all of these are much higher than India. If you're wondering where the US is here, 12,000. This is where the US is. So again, India's per capita electricity consumption is still very low, and that is why when the world talks about climate change, when the world talks about efforts to be taken to reduce climate change, India accepts the responsibility but also wants the world to understand that we are not the top polluters, we are not even the top consumers of energy, so it's not fair to expect that we should be the one cutting down on energy consumption when the world is consuming so much more energy. The next article is from Economics. The RBI has proposed a new framework for project financing. So I'll tell you something. This is not a news that came in yesterday. Hindu newspaper, I don't know, they have a very weird habit. Hindu newspaper sometimes republish a news after a few days. Maybe they don't have enough news to print on some days, so they republish the news. So this news came in a couple of weeks earlier first. Some of you might have already read about this. If you have, great, you can skip this part. But this news, I don't know if it was covered in the earlier CNA or not, I was not aware. So I have covered this because it is in today's Hindu newspaper. But this is not something that came out yesterday. It basically came out a couple of weeks earlier. So it was covered at some place. So basically, what exactly is this? So RBI has given some new guidelines about project financing. First, try and understand what is project financing. How is it different? See, when you go to a bank, you ask for a home loan, an education loan, car loan, whatever. Let's say today you take a loan. From the next month onwards, your EMI will start getting deducted. You don't get a waiting period, right? Because if you take a car loan, from the next month you have to pay EMI. If you take a home loan, next month you have to pay the EMI. That's how it starts. However, now let's assume there is a company that goes to the bank and says, please give me 1,000 crore rupees. I want to build a highway. And the company says, we will build this highway, and when this highway is operational, we will get a toll and we'll get this income from the toll, so we'll return your money. And that is how these projects work. The problem is the bank will not get any money back in this case before the toll is operational. So there's a long waiting period called the gestation period. So for example, in 2024, if the highway starts to be built and it is only built by 2030, that is when it starts to become operational. Only in 2030 they start to take a toll. That is how they earn. That's when they start paying the money back. So bank gets nothing for these 6 years. So banks have to wait a long time before they start getting their money back in this kind of project. Now that is a very dangerous proposition for the banks because a lot can go wrong in these 6 years. Something wrong might happen with the project cost increases, which it usually does. Cost of raw material increases, all of a sudden cost of labor increases. Something wrong happens, the company goes bankrupt. A lot can go wrong. And this is what results in the NPA. That's why you will see a lot of builders, etc. involved in these NPAs, etc. not being able to pay back the money, while normal consumer pays back the money because on the very next month you have to pay it back. That is the difference. So RBI now wants to play it safer, wants to make sure that the banks don't have so much NPAs. Because of it, they have proposed new guidelines. Now, these are not final guidelines. This is a draft proposal. RBI has basically published it in the public domain, asking for people to give a feedback. Feedback line is open till 15th of June, so one day before your prelims examination. If you're really worried, you can give a feedback here, and then on 16th you can go for your prelims. So basically they have asked for feedback. Depending upon which they may change it as well. That is the present situation. So basically, if you look at the data at present right now, Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation says out of 1837 projects that the ministry looked into, 779 were delayed and 449 faced cost overruns. Cost overruns mean the cost increased drastically, now they need more money. That becomes problematic. You can't go back to the bank once again and say, oh, I took 1,000 crore rupees, give me 200 crore more because the cost has increased, without paying anything back to the bank. That becomes problematic. And when the banks say no, the project gets stalled. A lot of times when the companies go back to banks asking for more money and they say, we don't have more money, the project gets nowhere and gets stopped in between. All the money gets stuck, the banks don't get any money back, the builders are bankrupt, and this becomes a problem. So what has the RBI done? RBI now wants to mitigate credit event. Means RBI wants to basically ensure that this event of builders requiring more money does not happen. They need to extend, or they don't, the RBI does not need that the project should be delayed. They want the project to start commercial operations as soon as possible. The reason is, the later they start the commercial operations, the later the money will be given back to the bank. Now, there are two big changes or two big interesting facts in this proposal, what RBI has proposed. First one, something called provisioning. Now, what is provisioning? Provisioning basically means whatever money that you take from the bank as a builder, you have to set aside some money for potential loss, that you may face some loss in the future. So you have to first set aside some money, kind of basically saving it for a rainy day, saving it if something goes wrong. This is called provisioning. Mandatorily, till now, 0.5% was the provisioning rate. 0.4% rather was the provisioning rate. Currently, whatever is your total expenditure of the project, 0.4% you had to keep aside because you might face a loss in the future. RBI said 0.4% is nothing. It is very, very low. Keep at least 5% aside for provisioning. So provisioning was at least 0.4% right now. Now it has been increased to 5%. So a much larger sum of money has to be kept aside in these projects because there might be a potential loss in the future. This 5% is not for the entire time period. 5% is when the project is still being built. Then it can go down to up to 1% when the project starts operations. So it will start to reduce. 5% initially when the project is just getting constructed, it will come down gradually and it will at the last day reach 1% till the entire loan is given back, so that at least some money is being kept. Now obviously builders don't like it, these infrastructure companies don't like it, keeping 5% cost of a project in a separate account for provisioning when you are not used to it is something that you don't really want. Now this framework apart from this also says that you can, if you want, have a moratorium period. Moratorium period basically means a period when you don't have to repay the money. So let's say for example, I am giving back a home loan and all of a sudden I have some loss, I don't have money, so I can request the bank that please don't take EMI from me for 3 months or 4 months. That's called a moratorium period. So moratorium means a time period where you can stop your EMI by telling that this is the reason. RBI says that moratorium can also be done, but for maximum of 6 months. For maximum of 6 months it can be done, and it also has to be under strict supervisions. These are some of the impacts that it will have on the bank. The article does not tell you, but these are the impacts that this rule might have on the bank. Number one, banks now have to keep aside 5% of the loan amount during the construction, which is very, very, very high. Banks have a $10 trillion loan book. 15% of it is infrastructure, which means about 4,500 crore rupees can be or have to be set aside by the banks, and that becomes very problematic. Banks have to set aside such a large sum of money. They can't really use it because if they have a loss, they would have to then accommodate that, and that becomes a problem for the banks. It might have a higher lending rate because when the banks have to set aside such a large money, they would want to compensate for that, and it will increase the lending rates as well. Also, There has to be a strict moratorium limit of 6 months. As I said, 6 months is the time period after which the moratorium cannot be extended. These are the articles from the mains exam point of view. Now from the prelims point of view, there is just one article from science. The role of X chromosome as being found in some autoimmune diseases. As you know, all of us have a pair of chromosomes. Amongst female, 2 copies of X chromosomes are found. So XX is female, this is a basic knowledge, and XY is male. X chromosome specifically is being linked to a lot of diseases. For example, amongst the males also, there are about 500 diseases amongst the males that take place because of this X chromosome. For example, green-red color blindness, which affects about 8% of the males, is because of this X chromosome. However, amongst the females specifically, this double X copy of the chromosome has a much greater impact. It has led to a lot of autoimmune diseases in the long run. Now, autoimmune diseases are extremely bad because this is where your own immune system starts fighting against your own body. It has also been found that Alzheimer's disease, which is one of the leading cause of deaths in the US, Alzheimer's disease also is actually much more common and can be linked to X chromosome. It is much more common amongst women, and again the reason is because they have twice as many X chromosomes as compared to males. That is why you will see many more Alzheimer patients being women as compared to being men. This is what autoimmune diseases are. As I told you, these are conditions where your own immune system will work against you. It will start attacking your own healthy cells. It will not be able to differentiate between your own body cells and foreign substances that have come into your body. Right now, we know more than 80 autoimmune diseases that can affect different parts of the body. Some of them include type 1 diabetes. We also have multiple sclerosis. We also have arthritis. All these are considered as autoimmune diseases. This brings us to the end of this session of the Hindu Newspaper Analysis. There are a couple of practice questions. First one about the RBI's proposed guidelines about project financing, and second one about how our politics needs to include climate change as a promise. I hope you learned something new today. Do join me tomorrow as well at 10 a.m. for the next session of the Hindu Newspaper Analysis. Till then, bye-bye. Jai Hind.